I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the same plate for the third time, when my daughter-in-law Rebecca walked in. She didn't say hello. She never did anymore. She just opened the refrigerator, stared at the contents for a long moment, then closed it with a sigh so loud it filled the entire room. "Margaret," she said, not looking at me, "we need to talk about the grocery situation." The grocery situation. That's what she called it when I bought the wrong brand of milk, or forgot to pick up her organic yogurt. I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel, the one with faded sunflowers that my late husband David had given me 20 years ago. "What about it?" I asked quietly. She turned to face me then, arms crossed over her chest. "You're buying things we don't need. The pantry is full of your old person food. And there's no room for what we actually eat." Old person food. I felt something twist in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I buy oatmeal and tea, Rebecca. They don't take up much space." "It's not just that." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's everything. You rearrange things after I organize them. You leave lights on. You use the washing machine during peak hours. Thomas and I are trying to save money and you're just here, using everything like it's still your house." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cold. Like it's still your house. I wanted to remind her that this was, in fact, still my house. That the deed had my name on it. That every piece of furniture, every curtain, every floorboard had been chosen and paid for by David and me, years before she was born. But I said nothing. I just stood there, holding the sunflower towel, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. Thomas appeared in the doorway then, my son, my only child. The boy I had raised alone after David died. The boy I had worked double shifts to put through college. The boy who had promised 6 years ago when he lost his job, that moving in would be temporary. "Mom," he said, and there was something in his voice I didn't recognize. Something hard. "Rebecca and I have been discussing things. We think it's time we made some changes around here." I set the towel down carefully on the counter. "What kind of changes?" Rebecca jumped in before Thomas could answer. "We need you to start contributing. Financially, I mean. It's only fair. We're covering all the bills, the food, the utilities. You live here rent-free." Rent-free. The words echoed in my mind. I lived in my own home rent-free. "This house is paid off," I said slowly. "There is no rent." "But there are expenses," Thomas said, stepping closer. "Property taxes, insurance, repairs. We've been handling all of that." "Because you moved in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you needed help. And now we're helping you," Rebecca said, her tone suggesting that the conversation was already over. "We're giving you a place to live. The least you could do is help with the costs." Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet fracturing, like ice on a lake that's been walked on too many times. I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching for the child who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to tell me I was the strongest person he knew. But that child was gone. In his place stood a man who saw his mother as a burden. "How much?" I asked. Rebecca's eyes lit up. "We think $1,200 a month is reasonable. That covers your share of everything." $1,200. My pension was barely $1,500. They wanted me to hand over almost everything I had just to live in the house David and I had built with our own hands. "And if I can't pay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Thomas looked away. Rebecca didn't. "Then we'll need to discuss other arrangements. Maybe a senior living facility. Somewhere more affordable for everyone." The room tilted slightly. Or maybe it was me. I reached out and gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself. A senior living facility. They wanted to put me in a home so they could take over my house completely. "I see," I said. Just 2 simple words, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Rebecca checked her watch. "We need your answer by the end of the week. We can't keep floating everything while you figure things out." She walked out without waiting for a response. Thomas lingered for a moment, his hand on the doorframe, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he said softly. It's not personal. We're all trying to make this work." Then he was gone too, and I was alone in the kitchen that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked slowly to the window and looked out at the garden. David had planted roses there 30 years ago, one for each year we'd been married. They still bloomed every spring, faithful and beautiful. I had tended them alone for the 15 years since he died, talking to them sometimes, telling them about my day, about Thomas, about the grandchildren I rarely saw because Rebecca said they needed structure and routine. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window glass. An old woman, 76 years old, with silver hair and tired eyes. When had I become invisible in my own life? When had I stopped being Margaret Harrison, nurse, widow, mother, and become just an inconvenience to be managed? I pressed my palm against the cool glass and made a decision. Not right away. Not with anger or tears. But with the quiet certainty that comes from finally seeing the truth clearly. They thought this house was theirs. They thought I had no choice but to accept whatever scraps of dignity they were willing to leave me. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the room they had moved me to 3 years ago when Rebecca decided the master bedroom would be better for them. "You don't need all that space," she had said, as if my needs had somehow shrunk along with my assigned territory in the house. The ceiling above me creaked with their footsteps. I could hear their voices, muffled but animated. They were probably discussing their victory, planning how they would spend the money I didn't have. I turned on the bedside lamp, the old brass one that David had found at a yard sale. He had cleaned it, rewired it, made it beautiful again. That was his gift, seeing value in things others overlooked. I wished he could see me now. Would he recognize the woman lying in this narrow bed, pushed to the margins of her own home? The photograph on my nightstand showed us on our wedding day. I was 23, wearing a simple white dress my mother had sewn. David was 25 in a borrowed suit, grinning like he'd won the lottery. We had nothing back then. No money, no house, just two people who believed that love and hard work could build a life. And we did build one. Every plank of this house held our story. I remembered the summer we saved enough for the down payment. David worked construction 6 days a week. I worked as a nursing assistant at the hospital, taking every extra shift I could. We ate simple meals, wore secondhand clothes, and put every spare dollar into a coffee can hidden in the back of our closet. When we finally had enough, David cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come from pure joy mixed with exhaustion. We moved in on a Saturday in September, and the house was empty except for a mattress on the floor and 2 folding chairs. But it was ours. Thomas was born in the master bedroom, the one Rebecca now considered hers. I had wanted a home birth, and David had painted the walls pale yellow the week before, saying our baby should come into a room full of sunshine. I could still remember the weight of my newborn son in my arms, the way David looked at both of us like we were the most precious things in the world. "We made this," he had whispered. "All of this. We made it together." Those words echoed through my mind now, bitter and sweet at the same time. I raised Thomas in every corner of this house. I taught him to walk in the hallway, holding his small hands as he took wobbly steps. I baked his birthday cakes in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Rebecca now complained about my old person food. I sat with him at the dining table every evening, helping with homework, listening to his dreams about the future. When David died, Thomas was 22. He had just graduated from college, full of plans and possibilities. The grief hit him hard. He disappeared into himself for months, barely speaking, barely eating. I held our small family together, working full-time while managing my own broken heart, making sure Thomas knew he wasn't alone. "You're so strong, Mom," he told me at David's funeral. "I don't know how you do it." I wasn't strong. I was surviving. But I let him believe it because he needed to believe his mother could handle anything. The years passed. Thomas built his career, met Rebecca, got married. They seemed happy and I was glad. I loved seeing my son smile again. Loved the idea of grandchildren filling the house with laughter. When they had their first child, Emma, I was overjoyed. I knitted blankets, bought toys, offered to babysit whenever they needed. But Rebecca had rules. So many rules. The baby needed to follow a schedule. No sugar. No television. No deviating from the routine Rebecca had read about in her parenting books. I tried to follow the rules. I really did. But one afternoon, when Emma was crying and nothing else worked, I sang her an old lullaby my mother had sung to me. The baby calmed immediately, falling asleep in my arms. Rebecca was furious. "That's not on the schedule," she said, taking Emma from me. "She needs to learn to self-soothe. You're undermining everything we're trying to teach her." That was the beginning. The slow, steady push to the edges of their lives and my own. When Thomas lost his job 6 years ago, they were desperate. Rebecca was pregnant with their second child. They couldn't afford their rent. Thomas came to me with tears in his eyes, the same eyes that used to look at me with such love and respect. "Mom," he said, "I hate to ask, but could we stay with you? Just for a few months until I find something new." What was I supposed to say? He was my son. This was his childhood home. Of course I said yes. "Stay as long as you need," I told him, opening my door and my life without hesitation. I thought we would be a family again. I thought having them close would heal the distance that had grown between us. Instead, the distance became a wall, and I found myself on the wrong side of it. The few months became a year. Then 2. Then 6. Somewhere along the way, their gratitude evaporated. The temporary arrangement became permanent in their minds, and I became the guest in my own home. Now, lying in the darkness, I understood something painful but necessary. They hadn't just taken my space. They had taken my story and rewritten it. In their version, this house belonged to them. I was just an old woman who happened to live here, someone to be managed and eventually moved aside. But I remembered the truth. I remembered every sacrifice, every early morning, every late night. I remembered David's hands building the deck, my hands planting the garden, both our hands painting these walls with love and hope. This house was never just walls and a roof. It was the physical proof that two people with nothing could create something lasting. It was David's legacy and mine, and I was not going to let it be taken from me without a fight. As dawn broke through my small window, I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not plead. I would not make myself smaller to fit into their plans. I would do what I should have done years ago. I would draw a line they could not cross. Morning came with the usual sounds. Rebecca's alarm at 6:30, sharp and insistent. The shower running. Footsteps overhead, back and forth, back and forth. The coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen. All the sounds of a house waking up, except none of them waited for me anymore. I dressed slowly, my joints stiff from a sleepless night. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. When had my cheeks become so hollow? When had the light in my eyes dimmed to this dull acceptance? I touched my face gently, tracing the lines that grief and time had carved there. "You're still here," I whispered to myself. "You're still Margaret Harrison." Saying my full name out loud felt like reclaiming something I had lost without noticing. In the kitchen, Rebecca was packing lunches with military precision. She didn't look up when I entered. Thomas sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, drinking coffee from the mug I had given him years ago. It said "World's Best Son" in faded letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Good morning," I said quietly. Thomas grunted. Rebecca said nothing. I might as well have been invisible. I made my tea, the cheap kind I bought because Rebecca complained that my preferred brand was too expensive. It tasted like water with regret, but I sipped it anyway, standing by the sink because both chairs at the small breakfast table were occupied with their belongings. Newspapers, Rebecca's laptop, Thomas's work bag. No room for me. The children thundered down the stairs. Emma, now 9, and Jacob, 7. They used to run to me for hugs. Now they barely glanced in my direction as they grabbed their backpacks. "Grandma," Emma said suddenly, stopping at the door. "Can you come to my school play next week?" My heart lifted. "Of course, sweetheart. I would love to." "Actually," Rebecca interrupted, her voice sharp, "Grandma might be busy that day. We'll see." Emma's face fell. She looked at me with confusion, then followed her mother out the door without another word. Thomas trailed behind them, still glued to his phone. The door closed. The house fell silent. I stood there for a long moment, tea growing cold in my hands, feeling the weight of 6 years pressing down on my shoulders. 6 years of "we'll see" and "maybe later," and that's not helpful. 6 years of watching my grandchildren grow up at arm's length because Rebecca had decided I wasn't the kind of grandmother they needed. What kind was I? The old-fashioned kind. The kind who baked cookies instead of buying organic snacks. The kind who told stories instead of educational facts. The kind who believed love was more important than schedules. Apparently that wasn't good enough. I washed my cup slowly, then walked through the house. Really walked through it, seeing it with new eyes. In the living room, all my photographs had been taken down. The walls now displayed Rebecca's taste, modern art prints that meant nothing, cold and impersonal. My mother's quilt, the one she had sewn by hand, was gone from the couch. When had that happened? In the corner sat David's old reading chair, the leather cracked and worn. Thomas used to curl up in that chair as a boy, reading comic books while David read the newspaper. Now it was covered with Rebecca's decorative pillows, and a sign on the wall above it said, "Live, laugh, love" in cursive letters. David would have hated that sign. I moved to the hallway where family photos used to line the walls. Photos of Thomas growing up, of David and me on various anniversaries, of 3 generations gathered around holiday tables. All gone, replaced by professional portraits of Thomas, Rebecca, and the children. Formal, posed, perfect. I wasn't in a single one. It was as if I had been erased. The master bedroom door was open. I stood at the threshold, not entering. That had been made clear 3 years ago. This was their private space now, but I could see inside. They had painted over the pale yellow walls, the ones David had painted for Thomas's birth. Now they were gray. Fashionable, Rebecca had said. Sophisticated. To me they looked like grief. I turned away and walked to the small room that was now mine. It used to be Thomas's childhood bedroom. I could still see the pencil marks on the doorframe where David had measured his height every birthday. Thomas had tried to paint over them once, but I stopped him. "Those marks are part of our history," I had said. "They tell the story of who we were." The marks were gone now. Fresh paint covered them completely. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. Not just rooms and photographs and decorative choices. They had taken my place in the story of this family. They had taken my relevance, my purpose, my voice. But they couldn't take my memory. They couldn't erase what David and I had built, no matter how many walls they painted or photographs they removed. A thought crystallized in my mind, sharp and clear. If I stayed silent, if I continued to shrink and accommodate and disappear, I would lose myself completely. The woman David had loved, the woman who had survived loss and hardship and loneliness, would vanish as if she had never existed. I couldn't let that happen. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small address book, worn and outdated. Inside were phone numbers written in pen, some crossed out and updated, a chronicle of my life. I found the name I was looking for. Patricia Chun, my friend from nursing school, the one who had become a lawyer. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Life gets busy, or at least that's what I told myself. The truth was, Rebecca made it clear that my phone conversations were disruptive. So I had stopped calling people. I had stopped reaching out. I had made myself quieter and quieter until I was barely making any sound at all. I stared at Patricia's number for a long time. Making this call felt like stepping off a cliff. Once I did it, there would be no going back. Things would change, probably not for the better, at least not at first. There would be anger, arguments, possibly things said that could never be unsaid. But what was the alternative? To hand over $1,200 a month until I had nothing left? To let them push me into a facility somewhere while they took over my home completely? To disappear without ever standing up for myself? I picked up my phone. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed, but I didn't stop. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. "Margaret? Margaret Harrison? Is that really you?" Her voice was warm, familiar, like coming home after a long journey. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Hello, Patricia," I said. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. For you? Never. How are you? It's been too long." I took a breath. "Actually, Patricia, I need help. Legal help. It's about my house." There was a pause. Then, in a more serious tone, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about Thomas and Rebecca moving in 6 years ago. About the slow takeover of my space, my home, my life. About the demand for rent. About their plans to move me into senior living. I told her everything I had been holding inside. And with each word, I felt a little bit stronger. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Margaret, do you still have the deed to your house?" "Yes. It's in my filing cabinet." "Good. Don't let it out of your sight. I'm going to help you, but I need you to do something for me first." "What?" "I need you to remember that you are not a burden. You are a woman who owns her own home, who raised a family, who worked hard her entire life. What's happening to you is not okay, and it's not your fault. Do you hear me? The tears came then, hot and fast. Yes, I whispered. We're going to fix this, Patricia said firmly. But Margaret, you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. Your son might not understand. There might be conflict. I looked around my small room, at the space I had been compressed into, at the life I had been reduced to. I'm ready, I said. And for the first time in 6 years I meant it. Patricia came to visit 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon when Thomas and Rebecca were both at work and the children were at school. She arrived in a sensible gray sedan, carrying a leather briefcase that looked well used and professional. When I opened the door, she pulled me into a tight hug. Let me look at you, she said, stepping back. Her eyes scanned my face with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent decades reading people. Margaret, you've lost weight. I'm fine, I said automatically, the response I had trained myself to give. No, Patricia said gently. You're not. But you will be. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Rebecca had demanded rent money. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad and several documents. First things first, she said. I need to see the deed to the house, any mortgage documents, property tax records, and your financial statements. Everything that proves ownership and shows the true state of affairs. I retrieved the metal filing cabinet from the back of my closet, the one Rebecca didn't know existed. Inside were all the important papers I had kept safe over the years. I handed them to Patricia and watched as she reviewed each document carefully, making notes on her pad. This is very clear, she said after a while. The house is in your name only. It was paid off 12 years ago. There's no mortgage, no lien, nothing. You are the sole legal owner. That's what I thought, I said. But they make me feel like I'm wrong. Like I'm being unreasonable. Patricia looked up sharply. Margaret, what else have they been saying to you? I hesitated. Speaking the truth out loud felt like betrayal, even though I knew it shouldn't. They say I don't contribute. That I'm a burden on their finances. Rebecca keeps talking about how expensive everything is. How much they're spending on groceries and utilities. Do you know what they're actually spending? Patricia asked. I shook my head. They don't share that information with me. Rebecca handles all the shopping. Thomas pays the utility bills from his account. They say it's easier that way. Patricia's expression hardened. Margaret, do you receive mail? Bank statements, property tax notices, anything? Rebecca usually gets the mail. She brings me anything that looks important. Usually. Patricia's pen was poised over her notepad. Not always. I thought about it. Actually, I can't remember the last time I saw my property tax statement. Rebecca said she filed it away for me, that I shouldn't worry about those things at my age. Patricia was quiet for a moment, her jaw tight. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you signed any documents in the past few years? Anything Rebecca or Thomas asked you to sign? My stomach dropped. There was something last year. Rebecca said it was for insurance purposes. Some kind of beneficiary form. She said it would make things easier if anything happened to me, so the house wouldn't be tied up in probate. Did you read it carefully? I tried, but the print was small, and I didn't have my reading glasses handy. Rebecca seemed frustrated that I was taking so long, so I just signed it. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. Did you keep a copy? No. Rebecca said she would file it with the other important papers. Margaret, Patricia said carefully, I need you to understand something. What you're describing sounds like financial manipulation. At worst, it could be elder abuse. I need to investigate what you actually signed. The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. But they're my family. Thomas is my son. I know, Patricia said softly. And this is going to be hard to hear, but family members are actually the most common perpetrators of elder financial abuse. It doesn't mean Thomas is a bad person. It means he and his wife may have convinced themselves that what they're doing is justified. I felt dizzy. What do we do? First, we get copies of everything. Property records are public. I can request copies of any documents filed with the county. If they tried to add their names to your deed or transfer ownership in any way, there will be a record. And if they did? Patricia's expression was firm. Then we fight it. But let's not jump ahead. For now, I want you to start documenting everything. Every conversation about money, every demand they make, every time they restrict your access to your own home. Write it down with dates and times. She pulled a small notebook from her briefcase and handed it to me. Keep this hidden. Don't let them see it. The idea of hiding things from my own son made me feel sick, but I took the notebook. There's something else, Patricia said. I want to talk about your finances. You mentioned your pension is $1,500 a month. Is that your only income? I have some savings, I said. About $18,000 in a savings account. And David had a small life insurance policy that I've been holding on to. How much? $50,000. I never touched it. I always thought I'd leave it to Thomas. Patricia made a note. Margaret, you need to secure that money. Open a new account at a different bank, one they don't know about. Transfer the savings and the life insurance money there. Don't tell them about it. But that feels dishonest. It's not dishonest. It's protecting yourself. If they're pressuring you for money now, it will only get worse if they know you have savings. And if they've already manipulated you into signing documents, they might try to get access to your accounts. The room felt too small suddenly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at David's rose garden. The bushes were overgrown now. Rebecca said hiring a gardener was too expensive, and I wasn't strong enough to maintain them myself anymore. How did this happen? I whispered. How did I let things get this bad? Patricia came to stand beside me. It happened slowly. That's how these things always work. Little compromises that seem reasonable at the time. Small concessions that add up over years until you look around and realize you've given away everything. I just wanted to help my son. I know. And he took advantage of that. Maybe not consciously at first, but that's what happened. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Patricia said, Margaret, I need to ask you something important. What do you want? Not what Thomas wants, not what Rebecca wants. What do you want? I turned to face her. I want my home back. I want to feel like I belong here again. I want to see my grandchildren without permission. I want to make my own tea and eat my own food and sit in my own living room without feeling like I'm in the way. Then that's what we'll fight for, Patricia said. But you need to be prepared. This is going to get worse before it gets better. When we start pushing back, they're going to push harder. They might say terrible things. They might try to make you feel guilty or crazy or unreasonable. I already feel all those things, I said quietly. I know, but you're none of them. You're a woman who deserves respect in her own home. After Patricia left, I sat in my room with the notebook she had given me. I opened it to the first page and wrote the date at the top. Then I began documenting everything I could remember from the past 6 years. Every time Rebecca had criticized my choices. Every time Thomas had dismissed my concerns. Every time I had been made to feel small in the house David and I built. The list grew longer and longer. By the time I finished, my hand was cramping and the light outside had faded to dusk. I stared at the pages filled with my handwriting, evidence of years of slow erosion. This was my life. These were the facts. And facts, as Patricia would say, were the foundation of any good case. I heard the front door open. Thomas and Rebecca were home. Their voices carried through the house, relaxed and easy. They had no idea what was coming. Part of me wanted to warn them, to smooth things over, to find a way to make everyone happy. But that part of me had stayed silent for too long. I closed the notebook and hid it under my mattress. Then I went to dinner where I would smile and nod and play the role they expected. But inside I was done disappearing. Inside I was preparing for war. The following week passed in a strange fog. I moved through the house like an actor playing a role, saying my lines, hitting my marks, all while a different story played out beneath the surface. I documented everything in my hidden notebook. I opened a new bank account at a branch across town, transferring my savings during the hours when Thomas and Rebecca were at work. And I waited. Patricia called every other day to check on me. How are you holding up? She would ask. I'm managing, I always replied. But the truth was more complicated. Every smile I gave Thomas felt like a lie. Every polite conversation with Rebecca felt like walking on broken glass. I was living in my own home as a spy, gathering evidence against my own family. It made me feel sick. But it also made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. On Wednesday evening, Rebecca announced they were having friends over for dinner on Saturday. Not asked. Announced. Just 4 couples, she said, chopping vegetables with sharp, efficient movements. Nothing fancy. I'll do a simple pasta dish and salad. I was drying dishes at the sink. That sounds lovely. Should I help with the cooking? Rebecca's knife paused mid-chop. Actually, Margaret, it might be better if you ate in your room that night. These are Thomas's colleagues, and the dining room will be crowded. The dish towel went still in my hands. You want me to eat in my room? It's just easier, Rebecca said, not looking at me. You don't really know these people, and honestly, the conversation might bore you anyway. They're all going to talk about work and business things. Thomas walked in, loosening his tie. What's going on? I was just explaining to your mother that Saturday's dinner party will be adults only, Rebecca said smoothly. Thomas glanced at me, then away. That makes sense, Mom. You'd probably rather have a quiet evening anyway, right? I looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he learned to avoid my eyes like this? When had he started treating me like a child who needed to be managed rather than a mother who deserved respect? This is my house, I said quietly. The kitchen went silent. Rebecca's knife stopped moving. Thomas's hand froze on his tie. What? Rebecca said. This is my house, I repeated louder this time. And I will eat dinner in my own dining room if I choose to. Rebecca's face flushed. We're trying to have a nice evening with friends. Is that too much to ask? You didn't ask, I said. You never ask. You tell me what will happen, where I should be, what I should do. In my own home. Thomas stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. Mom, come on. Don't make this into a big thing. We're just trying to have a dinner party. Without me, I said. In my house. Using my dining room, my dishes, my table. The table you never use, Rebecca snapped. The dining room that was sitting empty before we moved in. God, Margaret, why do you have to be so difficult? Difficult, I repeated. The word tasted bitter. I'm difficult because I don't want to hide in my bedroom while strangers eat in my dining room? Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. This is exactly what we were talking about. This attitude. This possessiveness over every little thing. Every little thing, I said. Like my home. Our home, Rebecca corrected. We live here too. We've been living here for 6 years. At some point, Margaret, you have to accept that things have changed. You're right, I said, setting down the dish towel with deliberate care. Things have changed. You've changed them. You've taken over my house, pushed me into a corner, and now you want me to hide in my room when you entertain. We're not asking you to hide, Thomas said, his voice rising with frustration. We're asking you to be reasonable. These are important people. This dinner could help my career. And I would embarrass you, I said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas didn't deny it. He just stood there, guilt written across his face, but not enough guilt to take back what he'd implied. Rebecca broke the silence. This is ridiculous. Thomas, talk to your mother. About what? I asked before he could respond. About the rent you demanded? About the senior living facilities you've been researching? About how you're trying to erase me from my own life? Rebecca's eyes widened. How did you? She stopped herself, but it was too late. How did I know? I finished for her. I found the papers, Rebecca. The floor plans you drew up. The articles about convincing elderly parents to move. All of it. Thomas's face went pale. Mom, we were just exploring options. Just in case. In case what? I interrupted. In case I didn't agree to hand over my pension? In case I didn't disappear quietly? That's not fair, Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger. We've been supporting you. Feeding you, housing you. Housing me, I said, my voice deadly quiet. In my own house. A house that's too big for you, Rebecca shot back. A house you can't maintain by yourself. We've been doing you a favor, and all you do is complain and criticize and make everything harder. I never asked for your favors, I said. Thomas finally found his voice. You asked us to move in. You said stay as long as you need. I did, I agreed. 6 years ago when you lost your job and had nowhere else to go. I opened my home because you're my son and I love you. But you were supposed to get back on your feet and leave. Instead, you stayed and slowly took over everything. We take care of this place, Thomas argued. The bills, the repairs, everything. You couldn't manage it alone. You don't know that, I said. You never gave me the chance to try. You just assumed I was helpless and moved in and took control. Rebecca laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Took control? You still act like you own everything. You criticize how I organize the kitchen, how I raise the children, how I run this household. This household, Margaret. It's not just yours anymore. But it is, I said. Legally, financially, it is just mine. The deed has my name on it. Only my name. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Rebecca and Thomas exchanged a look, and I saw something flicker between them. Something that made my stomach clench. What? I said. What was that look? Nothing, Thomas said quickly. Mom, let's all calm down. We're family. We can work this out. The document I signed last year, I said, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The one Rebecca said was for insurance. What was it really? It was nothing, Rebecca said, but her voice was too tight, too defensive. Tell me the truth, I demanded. What did I sign? Thomas looked at the floor. Rebecca crossed her arms. Neither of them spoke. Tell me, I repeated louder this time. It was a transfer of deed, Thomas finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. With Rebecca and me as joint owners. In case something happened to you, so the house wouldn't be stuck in probate. The world tilted. I gripped the counter to steady myself. You put your names on my house? For legal protection, Rebecca said quickly. Estate planning. It's what responsible families do. Without telling me what I was signing, I said. Without explaining that I was giving away half my house. It's not giving away, Thomas argued. You still own it. We're just listed as co-owners. It protects everyone. It protects you, I said. It gives you legal claim to my property. That's why you've been so confident, so demanding. You think you already own this house. We're family, Rebecca said. What's yours is ours. That's how families work. I looked at her, this woman who had walked into my life 10 years ago, and slowly dismantled everything I had built. No, I said. That's not how families work. That's how thieves work. Rebecca's face turned crimson. How dare you? Get out, I said. They both stared at me. Get out of my kitchen. Get out now. Mom, Thomas started. Out, I repeated, my voice shaking but firm. I need to think. I need to breathe. I need you both to leave me alone. For a moment I thought they would refuse. But something in my face must have convinced them. Thomas nodded slowly, taking Rebecca's arm. They left the kitchen, their footsteps heavy on the stairs. I stood there for a long time, gripping the counter, trying to breathe through the betrayal that felt like a physical weight on my chest. They had stolen my house. Slowly, legally, with my own unwitting signature, they had stolen everything. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Patricia. They forged a deed transfer, I said when she answered. They put their names on my house. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice like steel, tomorrow morning, you and I are going to the county recorder's office. We're going to see exactly what they filed. And then, Margaret, we're going to take your house back. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. I woke before dawn, my body tense with purpose. Through my small window, I could see frost covering the grass in David's garden. Each blade crystallized and sharp. That's how I felt. Frozen but sharp, brittle but ready. Patricia arrived at 8 o'clock. I was already dressed, waiting by the door with my purse and the folder of documents we'd reviewed earlier. Thomas had left for work an hour before, clearly avoiding me. Rebecca was upstairs with the children, getting them ready for school. I heard her voice through the ceiling, sweet and patient with them in a way she never was with me anymore. Ready? Patricia asked, her hand gentle on my shoulder. I nodded. We walked to her car in silence. As we pulled away from the house, I looked back at it. The pale blue shutters David had painted. The brick path he'd laid stone by stone. The oak tree in the front yard where Thomas had his first tree house. My whole life lived in that structure, and now I was fighting to prove it was mine. The county recorder's office was a gray building downtown, all concrete and fluorescent lights. Inside, it smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. A tired-looking woman behind the counter barely glanced up when we approached. "We need to pull property records," Patricia said, sliding a form across the counter with my address written on it. "Everything filed in the last 5 years." The woman typed something into her computer, then disappeared into a back room. We waited in hard plastic chairs that reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. I'd spent so many years in places like this, waiting for test results, waiting for doctors, waiting to hear if patients would live or die. I knew how to wait, but this was different. This waiting felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "Whatever we find," Patricia said quietly, "we'll handle it. You're not alone in this." I wanted to believe her, but sitting there I felt more alone than I had in years. My son had betrayed me. That was the truth I kept circling back to. Not Rebecca, though she'd certainly pushed things along. But Thomas, my boy. He had knowingly put his name on my property without telling me what I was signing. The woman returned with a thick folder. "Here's everything. You can review it at that table over there. Make copies if you need them, 50 cents a page." Patricia opened the folder carefully, and we began going through the documents. Property tax records, utility transfers, maintenance permits. And then, dated 14 months ago, we found it. "Quitclaim deed," Patricia read aloud, her voice tight. "Margaret Harrison hereby transfers ownership interest to Margaret Harrison, Thomas Harrison, and Rebecca Harrison as joint tenants with right of survivorship." The words blurred in front of my eyes. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. That meant if I died, they would automatically own the house. I wouldn't even have the power to leave it to someone else in my will. "This can't be legal," I whispered. I didn't know what I was signing. Patricia was already examining the document closely. "Look at this. The notary's signature. Do you remember a notary being present when you signed?" I thought back to that day. Rebecca had presented the papers at the kitchen table. I'd asked what they were. She'd said something about insurance, about protecting the family. I'd signed while she stood over me, pointing to the signature line. Then she'd taken the papers and left. "There was no notary," I said. "It was just Rebecca and me." Patricia's jaw tightened. This notary stamp could be fraudulent. If you didn't sign in front of a notary, this entire document is invalid. But we'll need to verify that. She made copies of everything, the whir of the machine filling the quiet office. When we finished, we had a stack of papers 2 inches thick. Evidence of what had been done to me, laid out in black and white. In the car, Patricia was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Margaret, I need to be honest with you about what comes next. This is fraud. Clear documentable fraud. We can challenge this deed. We can likely get it reversed. But it's going to require legal action against your son and daughter-in-law." "What kind of legal action?" "At minimum, a civil suit to void the deed. Possibly a restraining order if they become hostile." "And Margaret?" She paused. "If the notary signature is forged, that's a criminal matter. The district attorney could get involved." My hands clenched in my lap. "You're saying my son could face criminal charges?" "I'm saying that what they did was illegal. The consequences of that are not your responsibility. They made their choices. But he was still my son. The baby I'd held. The boy I'd raised. The man who used to call me his hero. How had we arrived at this place where I had to choose between protecting myself and protecting him? What if I don't pursue it?" I asked quietly. "What if I just asked them to remove their names from the deed?" Patricia pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face me. "Margaret, listen to me carefully. These people convinced you to sign away your house. They've been planning to move you into a facility so they can have it completely. They demanded rent money you don't owe. They've isolated you, diminished you, and taken over your life. Do you really think they'll just say okay and walk away?" "He's my son," I said, my voice breaking. "I know. And I know this is impossibly hard. But your son has been stealing from you. Not all at once, not with violence, but slowly and methodically over years. That doesn't stop being theft just because he's family." Tears burned in my eyes. I keep thinking about him as a little boy. I keep remembering all the good times. Am I being cruel? "No," Patricia said firmly. "You're being honest. The Thomas who was a sweet child and the Thomas who committed fraud can both be true. People are complicated. But you can love your son and still hold him accountable for what he's done. We drove back to my house in silence. When Patricia dropped me off, she squeezed my hand. Think about what you want to do. But don't take too long. Every day they have their names on that deed is another day they're stealing from you. Inside, the house was empty. Rebecca had taken the children to school. I walked through the rooms, seeing everything differently now. They hadn't just taken over my space. They'd legally stolen my property. Every wall, every floor, every door that David and I had chosen and paid for and maintained, they'd claimed as their own with a forged signature. I went to my room and pulled out the notebook Patricia had given me. I flipped to a new page and began writing. Not documentation this time, but a letter. A letter to Thomas, saying everything I needed to say before this went any further. Dear Thomas, I wrote, I need you to understand what you've done. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I need you to see the truth clearly before we can't go back. The words poured out of me. Years of hurt, confusion, disappointment, and love all mixed together. I wrote about the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. I wrote about David and how proud he'd been of his son. I wrote about the house and what it meant, not just as property but as a symbol of a life built with love and sacrifice. You didn't just take my house, I wrote. You took my dignity. You took my voice. You made me feel like a burden in the place where I should have felt most secure. And the worst part is I let you. I stayed quiet because I loved you and I didn't want to push you away. But my silence didn't protect our relationship. It only taught you that my needs didn't matter. When I finished, my hand was cramping and my face was wet with tears. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope. Then I placed it on the kitchen table where Thomas would find it when he got home. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this letter would change anything or if we were already too far gone. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being invisible. Whatever came next, I would face it standing upright, speaking clearly, and demanding the respect I should have insisted on years ago. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs. David's house. My house. Not theirs. And I was going to take it back. Thomas found the letter at 6 o'clock that evening. I heard him come through the front door, heard his keys hit the table in the hallway, heard his footsteps move toward the kitchen. Then silence. A long, heavy silence that seemed to fill every corner of the house. I was in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady. In out. In out. The same way I used to breathe before emergency surgeries, before difficult conversations with families, before moments that would change everything. His footsteps came down the hall. Slow. Heavy. He knocked on my door, something he hadn't done in months. Mom. His voice was rough, strained. Can I come in? Yes. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, the letter clutched in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked younger somehow, stripped of the confidence he usually wore like armor. Is this true? He asked, holding up the letter. All of it. Every word, I said quietly. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a long moment he just stood there, the letter trembling slightly in his grip. Then he sank into the small chair by the window, the one that used to be in his childhood bedroom. I went to the county recorder's office today, I continued when he didn't speak. I saw the deed you filed, the one that put your name and Rebecca's name on my house. His head dropped into his hands. Mom, I can explain. Can you? I asked. Can you explain why you lied to me? Why you told me I was signing an insurance form when I was actually signing away my property? It wasn't like that, he said, his voice muffled. It wasn't meant to hurt you. Then what was it meant to do, Thomas? He looked up at me and I saw tears on his cheeks. My son was crying and part of me wanted to go to him to comfort him the way I had when he was small. But I stayed where I was. This time he needed to sit with his discomfort. We were scared, he said. Money's been so tight. I haven't been making what I used to and Rebecca's been stressed about the kids' expenses. And this house, Mom, it's worth so much. We thought if something happened to you, if you got sick or needed care, the house would get eaten up by medical bills or nursing home costs. So you decided to steal it first, I said. No, he said quickly. Not steal. Protect. We were protecting our family's future. Your family, I repeated. Not mine. Yours. He flinched. You're part of our family. Am I? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, I'm not family. I'm an obstacle. An inconvenience. Someone to be managed and eventually removed. That's not fair. Fair. The word came out sharper than I intended. You want to talk about fair? You moved into my home when you were desperate. I welcomed you without hesitation. I gave you everything I had: space, privacy, support, and you repaid me by slowly taking over my life and then legally stealing my property. I was going to tell you, he said weakly. Eventually. When? After I was dead and you'd inherited everything? After you'd moved me into some facility and changed the locks? His silence was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. Lights were coming on in neighboring houses. Families gathering for dinner. Normal evenings in normal homes where children didn't betray their parents. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked, my back still to him. It's not the fraud, though that's bad enough. It's not even the lying, though that breaks my heart. It's that you let me believe I was the problem. You let me feel guilty for existing in my own home. You let Rebecca criticize me and push me aside, and you never once defended me. Your own mother. I didn't know it had gotten that bad, he whispered. I turned to face him. You knew. You just didn't care enough to stop it. That's not true. Isn't it? How many times did Rebecca insult me while you stood there saying nothing? How many times did she rearrange my home, discard my belongings, dismiss my feelings, and you just let it happen? You chose her comfort over my dignity every single time. He was crying harder now, his shoulders shaking. I didn't mean to. She's my wife. I was trying to keep the peace. By sacrificing me, I said. That's what keeping the peace meant. Making sure I stayed quiet and small and out of the way so Rebecca wouldn't be upset. I'm sorry, he choked out. Mom, I'm so sorry. Sorry for what, exactly? Sorry you got caught? Sorry the D-transfer didn't work out the way you planned? Or are you actually sorry for what you've done to me? He looked up at me, his face crumbling. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how we got here. I do, I said. It happened one small choice at a time. One little compromise. One moment of taking the easy path instead of the right one. It happened because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to solve. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said simply. And now we have to figure out what comes next. He wiped his face with his sleeve, looking suddenly very much like the little boy he used to be. What do you want me to do? I want you to remove your names from my deed, I said. I want you to sign whatever documents are necessary to reverse the transfer you filed. And then I want you to find somewhere else to live. His head snapped up. You're kicking us out? I'm asking you to leave, I corrected. There's a difference. You're adults with jobs and resources. You can find your own place. But the kids, he started. Their school, their friends, they're settled here. They'll adjust, I said, my voice harder than I felt. Children are resilient. You taught me that when you survived your father's death. They'll be fine in a new home with their parents. What they won't be fine with is learning that their father stole from their grandmother. He flinched again at the word stole, but he didn't argue. How long? He asked quietly. 30 days, I said. I'll help you look for a place. I'll even help with a security deposit if you need it. But in 30 days, I want my house to myself again. He nodded slowly, then stood up. At the door he paused without turning around. I really am sorry, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix what's broken. Only actions do that. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I sat back down on the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. My whole body was trembling now that the confrontation was over. But underneath the fear and sadness, I felt something else. Relief. The truth was finally spoken. The pretending was over. Whatever happened next would be honest, even if it was painful. An honest pain, I was learning, was better than comfortable lies. The house changed overnight, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of acceptance, I was met with cold resistance. Rebecca didn't speak to me at all. When we passed in the hallways, she looked through me as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. The children were kept away, whisked off to school early and brought home late. Their laughter, which used to echo through the rooms, disappeared completely. Thomas tried to maintain some normalcy, but his attempts felt hollow. "Good morning, Mom," he'd say, his voice careful and distant. I'd nod, and that would be the extent of our conversation. The easy warmth that once existed between us had frozen into something brittle and painful. On the third day after our confrontation, I came home from a walk to find Rebecca in my sewing room. She was standing in the middle of the space, arms crossed, surveying it like a general planning a battle. "What are you doing in here?" I asked from the doorway. She didn't even look at me. "If we're leaving, we need to start packing. This room has the most storage space. I'll need to use it." "No," I said firmly. Now she did look at me, her eyes cold. "Excuse me. This room is off limits. You have your bedroom and the guest room for packing. This space is mine." Rebecca's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You're really going to do this? Fight over every inch of space right until we leave?" "I'm setting boundaries," I said. "Something I should have done years ago." "Boundaries," she repeated mockingly. "You know what I think, Margaret? I think you're a selfish old woman who can't stand to see her son happy. We built a life here, a family here, and you're tearing it apart because you can't share." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But I'd spent too many years in emergency rooms to fall apart at the sight of blood, even my own. "You didn't build anything here," I said quietly. "You occupied space that wasn't yours and convinced yourself it was. There's a difference." "We took care of you," Rebecca hissed. "We fed you, we included you, we gave you a family when you were alone. And this is how you repay us?" "You fed me food I paid for with my pension," I replied. "You included me when it was convenient and excluded me when it wasn't. And I was never alone, Rebecca. I had my home, my memories, my life. You're the ones who moved in and tried to erase all of it." Her face flushed red. "Thomas should have put you in a home years ago. That's where you belong. With other bitter old people who can't let go of the past." "Get out of this room," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Make me," she challenged. For a moment we stood there, two women locked in a battle neither of us had wanted but both of us had been moving toward for years. Then I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling my attorney," I said. "Patricia told me that if you interfere with my property or my access to any part of this house, it constitutes harassment and trespassing. Even though you're still living here, I own this house, every room in it, and I can have the police enforce my rights." Rebecca's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected me to know my rights or be willing to fight for them. She'd gotten too used to me backing down. "You wouldn't," she said, but her voice wavered. "Try me," I replied, my finger hovering over Patricia's number. She stared at me for a long moment, then spun on her heel and stormed out. I heard her march upstairs, heard her bedroom door slam. The whole house seemed to shake with her anger. I closed the door to the sewing room and leaned against it, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, but I'd done it. I'd held my ground. David's flannel shirt still hung on the back of the chair where I'd left it. I touched it gently, drawing strength from the memory of the man who'd always believed I was stronger than I thought. That evening, Thomas knocked on my door again. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. "Rebecca told me what happened," he said. "I'm sure she did," I replied. "Did she tell you the truth or her version of it?" He sighed and sat down heavily in the chair. "She said you threatened to call the police on her." "I told her I would protect my rights if she continued to invade my private space," I corrected. "There's a difference. Mom, we're all living under a lot of stress right now. Can't you just give us some space to pack without making everything a battle?" "You have an entire house to pack in," I said. "Every room except one. That's not me making things difficult. That's me maintaining the last small space that's still mine." He rubbed his face with both hands. "This is killing me. Having you and Rebecca at each other's throats. Trying to find a place we can afford. Explaining to the kids why we're suddenly moving. It's all too much." "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said, and I meant it. "But Thomas, these are the consequences of choices you made. I didn't create this situation. You and Rebecca did. We were trying to secure our future, he said, his voice rising with frustration. Is that so terrible? Wanting to make sure our family was protected. Your family, I said. Not our family. You keep saying that word like I'm included, but every decision you've made proves I'm not. You didn't protect me. You exploited me. I gave you a place to live, he argued. You moved into my place to live, I shot back. And you've been rewriting history ever since, trying to convince me that I should be grateful for the privilege of being tolerated in my own home. He stood up abruptly. You know what? Fine. You want us gone? We'll be gone. But don't expect me to come running back when you're lonely and realize you drove away the only family you had left. The words hit like a slap. I felt tears prick my eyes but refused to let them fall while he was watching. If the only way I can have family is by surrendering my dignity, I said quietly, then I'd rather be alone. He stared at me for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes. Pain maybe. Or recognition. Then he walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I got up and closed it gently. Then I sat on my bed and let the tears come. This was the hardest part, harder than the legal battles or the confrontations. This was mourning the relationship with my son while he was still alive, still in the house, but already gone in all the ways that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. How are you holding up? I typed back. It's hard. But I'm still standing. Her response came immediately. That's all you need to do. Stand your ground. One day at a time. One day at a time. I'd survived David's death one day at a time. I'd survived raising a child alone one day at a time. I'd survived a career of watching people fight for their lives one day at a time. I could survive this too. Outside my window the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. David's oak tree stood silhouetted against the colors, strong and unbending even as the wind tried to push it over. I thought about that tree, about how deep its roots went into the ground. They'd been growing for decades, spreading wide and deep, anchoring it so firmly that no storm could knock it down. My roots were deep too, deeper than Thomas or Rebecca understood. This house, this life, everything I'd built, it was all rooted in years of love and sacrifice and determination. They could push against me. They could resist and argue and make things difficult. But they couldn't uproot me. I was staying. And eventually, one way or another, they were leaving. That was the simple truth, as unchangeable as the seasons. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. The house became a war zone where every room was a potential battlefield, and silence was a weapon we all wielded with brutal efficiency. Rebecca stopped cooking. She ordered takeout for her family and left nothing for me. I made my own simple meals, eating alone in my room while their laughter drifted from the dining room, pointed and deliberate. Thomas avoided me completely. He left early for work and came home late, slipping past my door like a stranger. The few times we crossed paths, he looked through me with eyes that had gone cold and distant. My son had learned to make me invisible, and he was disturbingly good at it. The children suffered most. I could see it in Emma's confused glances, in Jacob's quiet withdrawal. They didn't understand why Grandma suddenly wasn't welcome at dinner, why their parents spoke in harsh whispers whenever I was near. One morning, Emma tried to hug me in the hallway. Rebecca pulled her away quickly, saying they were late for school. The look Emma gave me over her shoulder broke something inside me that I wasn't sure would ever heal. I documented everything in my notebook. Every hostile interaction. Every time they tried to enter my sewing room. Every passive-aggressive comment. Patricia said we might need this evidence, and I believed her. But writing it all down felt like chronicling the death of my family, one painful detail at a time. On Thursday evening, 2 weeks after our confrontation, I returned from the bank to find boxes blocking the hallway. Not in the garage where they were supposed to be packing, but throughout my house. In front of the bathroom. Blocking access to the kitchen. Stacked against the walls in the living room. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, surrounded by chaos she deliberately created. These boxes need to be moved, I said calmly. She didn't look up. We're packing. Boxes are part of that process. They're blocking access to common areas, I said. Move them to your bedroom or the garage. No, she said simply. Still not looking at me. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sharp. Rebecca, I'm asking you nicely. And I'm telling you no, she said, finally meeting my eyes. You want us out? Fine. But we'll pack on our timeline in our way. You don't get to control everything just because your name is on some piece of paper. That piece of paper is a legal deed, I said, my voice shaking. And this is still my house. For now, Rebecca said with a cold smile. But we're working on that. The words sent ice through my veins. What does that mean? She shrugged, returning to her phone. Thomas is talking to a lawyer. We're exploring our options. Turns out when you live somewhere for 6 years, when you've made improvements and paid bills, you might have some rights even without your name on the deed. You're lying, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. Am I? Rebecca's smile widened. We've paid for a new roof. We renovated the bathroom. We've covered utilities and maintenance for 6 years. Our lawyer thinks we might have a case for adverse possession, or at least compensation for our investment in the property. My heart was racing now. Could that be true? Could they really claim rights to my house because they'd lived here? You moved in as guests, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't charge you rent. Any improvements you made were voluntary. But we did make them, Rebecca countered. We have receipts, documentation, evidence that we've been maintaining and improving this property while you contributed nothing financially. A judge might find that very interesting. She was bluffing. She had to be. But the confidence in her voice made me doubt myself. What if she wasn't? What if Thomas really had found a lawyer who could tie up my house in legal battles for years? Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me. Get out of my living room. Take your boxes and get out. Rebecca laughed, actually laughed. Or what, Margaret? You'll call your lawyer friend? Go ahead. While you're at it, explain to her how you've been harassing us, creating a hostile living environment, making it impossible for us to peacefully pack and relocate. That works in our favor too. I was shaking now, my whole body trembling with rage and fear and helplessness. This woman had walked into my life and systematically destroyed everything I held dear. My relationship with my son, my sense of safety in my own home, my peace. You're cruel, I whispered. I'm practical, Rebecca corrected. And I'm a mother protecting her family. You want to throw us out on the street with 2 small children? What kind of grandmother does that? I'm giving you 30 days and offering to help with expenses, I said. That's more than generous considering what you've done. What we've done. Rebecca stood up now, her voice rising. We gave you company when you were alone. We gave you purpose. Those children gave you something to live for. Without us, you're just a lonely old woman rattling around in a house too big for her, waiting to die. We saved you from that pathetic existence, and you're too stubborn to see it. The words landed like physical blows. Each one found a soft spot, a place where I already doubted myself, already wondered if I was being selfish and unreasonable. Rebecca, what's going on? Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by his wife's raised voice. Your mother is harassing me again, Rebecca said, tears suddenly springing to her eyes. I'm trying to pack, trying to take care of our children during this incredibly stressful time, and she's screaming at me, threatening me. I didn't scream, I protested. I asked her to move the boxes that are blocking the hallway. Thomas came down the stairs slowly. He looked at the boxes, at Rebecca's tears, at my trembling hands. I saw him making a choice, weighing who to believe, who to support. Mom, he said finally, can you just give us some space? Please. We're doing our best here. The betrayal was complete. He'd chosen her version of events over mine without even questioning it. His mother, who'd never lied to him, who'd raised him alone, who'd given him everything. He didn't even pause to consider that I might be telling the truth. Of course, I said, my voice hollow. I'll give you space. I walked to my room and closed the door. Then I locked it, something I'd never done before in this house. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Patricia answered on the second ring. Margaret. They're threatening legal action, I said, and my voice finally broke. Rebecca says they have a lawyer. Something about adverse possession or compensation for improvements. Can they do that? Can they take my house? Slow down, Patricia said firmly. Tell me exactly what she said. I repeated the conversation, every painful word. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. She's bluffing, Patricia finally said. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation without the owner's permission. You invited them in. That defeats any adverse possession claim immediately. As for improvements, yes, they could sue for compensation, but that's a civil matter that would take years, and they'd need to prove the improvements significantly increase the property value. Most judges wouldn't award anything for normal maintenance. So I'm safe? I asked, desperately needing reassurance. Your house is safe, Patricia confirmed. But Margaret, this is escalating. The harassment, the intimidation tactics, this is getting dangerous. I think we need to accelerate the eviction process. But the 30 days aren't up yet. They're creating a hostile environment. That's grounds for immediate eviction. I can file an emergency order. I thought about Emma's confused face, about Jacob's silence, about the life I'd hoped to rebuild with my son once the dust settled. No, I said quietly. Not yet. Let them have their 30 days. But Patricia? I need you to file the paperwork to reverse that deed transfer. I want their names off my property as soon as legally possible. I'll file tomorrow, she promised. And Margaret? You're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my room. Outside, I could hear Rebecca and Thomas talking in low voices, probably strategizing their next move. The boxes remained in the hallway, a physical barrier between me and the rest of my house. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Rebecca's threats had been empty. Her cruelty had been desperate. She was fighting because she was losing, and she knew it. In 2 weeks, they would be gone. My house would be empty. My son might never forgive me, but I would still be standing. And sometimes, survival is its own kind of victory. The last day of the 30 days arrived on a Saturday. I woke to the sound of furniture being dragged across floors, boxes being stacked, car doors slamming. The sounds of departure, final and irreversible. I stayed in my room for most of the morning, giving them space to finish. Through my small window, I watched them load the moving truck they'd rented. Thomas carried boxes with mechanical efficiency, his face blank and unreadable. Rebecca directed the mover she'd hired, her voice sharp with instructions. The children sat on the front steps, small and quiet, watching their life being packed away. Around noon, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Emma standing there, her eyes red from crying. "Grandma," she said in a tiny voice, "can I say goodbye?" I knelt down, ignoring the protest in my knees, and opened my arms. She fell into them, her small body shaking with sobs. I held her tight, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair, memorizing the weight of her in my arms. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I don't want to leave you." "I know, sweetheart," I said, my own tears finally falling. "I know. Mom says you don't want us here anymore. She says you're making us leave." I pulled back to look at her face, wiping her tears with my thumb. "Emma, listen to me. I love you so much. I love your brother too. This isn't about you. This is grown-up stuff that's complicated and hard to explain. But I need you to know that you will always, always be welcome in my home. Always. Promise?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Rebecca's voice cut through the moment. "Emma, come on. We're leaving." Emma hugged me one more time, fierce and desperate, then ran down the hallway. I stood in my doorway, watching her go, feeling a piece of my heart go with her. Thomas came last. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, looking anywhere but at me. The moving truck was loaded. Rebecca and the children were already in the car. This was it. The final moment. "So," he said awkwardly, "I guess this is goodbye." "For now," I said quietly. "It doesn't have to be forever." He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. Doubt. Maybe even regret. "I talked to my lawyer," he said. "About the deed. He said what we did was legally questionable at best. That we didn't have grounds to fight you on it." "I know," I said. Patricia, your lawyer, she's really good. She made it very clear that we needed to sign the reversal paperwork or face fraud charges. I know that too. He shifted his weight. Mom, I need you to understand something. I never meant for things to go this way. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said. Not angry, just honest. You hurt me deeply, Thomas. And the worst part is that you let it happen for so long. You saw what Rebecca was doing, how she treated me, and you chose her comfort over my dignity every single time. She's my wife, he said weakly. And I'm your mother. Those things shouldn't have been in competition. A good man protects both. But you chose, and you chose wrong. His face crumpled slightly. I don't know how to fix this. You start by being honest, I said. With yourself and with me. You wanted this house. You wanted the security and the value and the stability it represented. That's why you went along with Rebecca's plans. That's why you didn't stand up for me. Be honest about that. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, you're right. I wanted it. I convinced myself it would be mine eventually anyway, so what did it matter? I didn't think about what it cost you. I just thought about what it would give us. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 6 years. Thank you for saying that, I said. That's a start. Where do we go from here? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I need time. You need to build your own life, not on top of mine. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed, we can find our way back to each other. But Thomas, it has to be different. You have to see me as a person, not a resource to be managed. He nodded slowly. I do see you, Mom. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I really see you. Rebecca honked the horn from the driveway, impatient and sharp. I have to go, Thomas said. I know. He took a step toward me, hesitated, then pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. I'm sorry, he whispered. For all of it. I know you are, I said. Then he was gone, walking down the hallway, out the front door, into the truck. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away. The moving truck followed, and then the street was empty and quiet. I closed the door gently and turned to face my house. It felt enormous suddenly. Too big, too quiet, too empty. Every room echoed with absence. But it was mine. Every inch of it, from the floors David and I had chosen to the walls we'd painted together. Mine. I walked through each room slowly, reclaiming the space. In the master bedroom, their bed was gone. I could move back in, sleep in the room where my son was born, where David and I had spent so many nights planning our future. In the living room, I could rearrange the furniture, hang my photographs back up, bring my mother's quilt out of storage. The house could be mine again. Would be mine again. But first I needed to breathe. I walked out to the back porch and sat in David's rocking chair. The oak tree he'd planted stood strong in the yard, its branches reaching toward the sky. Spring was coming. I could see tiny buds forming on the branches, promises of new growth. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. How are you? I typed back slowly. They're gone. The house is quiet. Are you okay? I thought about that question. Was I okay? My son was gone, possibly forever. My grandchildren were confused and hurting. I was alone in a house that suddenly felt too large for one person. My body ached, my heart hurt, and the silence was overwhelming. But I was in my own home. I could make my own tea. I could eat in my own kitchen. I could sleep in my own bed without permission. I could live without judgment, without criticism, without being made to feel small. Yes, I typed back. I think I am. Over the next few weeks, I slowly transformed the house back into a home. I moved into the master bedroom and hung David's picture on the wall, where I could see it every morning. I brought my sewing machine back to the living room where the light was better. I planted new roses in the garden, next to the ones David had planted, adding my own mark to the landscape we'd created together. Patricia helped me set up a proper budget. With my pension and savings properly managed, I was comfortable. Not rich, but secure. I could afford groceries and utilities and the occasional treat. I could live independently with dignity, exactly as I'd wanted. Some days were hard. The silence could be deafening. I missed the sound of children's laughter, even if that laughter had been kept from me. I missed having family around, even if that family had stopped treating me like family. But I also discovered things I'd forgotten about myself. I joined a book club at the library and met women my own age who actually listened when I spoke. I volunteered at the hospital where I used to work, reading to patients and offering comfort. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years of making myself smaller. One afternoon, 3 months after Thomas left, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mom. Thomas's voice was uncertain. Is this a bad time? My heart leaped and broke simultaneously. No, I said carefully. It's fine. I wanted you to know that we're settled. We found a house to rent. It's small, but it's nice. The kids are adjusting. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. Emma asks about you a lot. She misses you. I miss her too. I miss both of them. A pause. I miss you too, Mom. Tears pricked my eyes. Do you? Or do you miss what I could provide? He was quiet for a moment. That's fair. I deserve that. But I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying to understand what I did wrong. Rebecca and I are in counseling. I'm working on being more aware, more present. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be better. That's good, Thomas. That's really good. Do you think, he hesitated, do you think maybe Emma and Jacob could visit sometime? Not us, not yet. But the kids? They could come for an afternoon, and I'd pick them up. No pressure, no strings. Just time with their grandmother. I looked around my quiet house, at the empty rooms waiting to be filled with love again. I would like that very much. Really? Really? We made plans for the following weekend. When we hung up, I sat in David's chair and looked at his picture. We did it, I whispered to him. We protected our home. We stood our ground. And maybe, just maybe, we were finding a way forward. Not back to how things were, because that was impossible, but forward to something new. Something built on honesty and boundaries and mutual respect. The house settled around me with its familiar sounds. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet, peaceful, mine. And that was enough. That afternoon, I walked through my home one more time. I ran my hand along the banister, touched the walls, stood in each room and let myself feel the weight of what I'd fought for and won. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that a woman could stand up for herself, even when it cost her everything. It was proof that dignity mattered more than keeping peace. It was proof that sometimes love means saying no, even to people you'd die for. I opened all the windows, letting fresh air sweep through every room. The curtains fluttered in the breeze. The sun streamed in, touching corners that had been dark for too long. Outside, birds sang in David's oak tree. Spring had arrived, bringing with it the promise of renewal, of growth, of second chances. I was 76 years old. I was alone. I had lost my son, at least for now. But I had found myself again. And that, I realized, was worth everything I'd sacrificed to get here. The house was mine. My life was mine. My choices were mine. And I was finally truly home.